The more you know, the more you can set yourself up for success and fight back against certain things. And the more you can understand and learn about your body, the more you can work with it and not fight against it. What we are going to cover tonight is the role of leptin, ghrelin, and other appetite hormones as it relates to fat loss and just in general appetite management, right? So this is the important thing that we got to understand here, is that there's a lot of moving parts behind the scenes here in terms of your hunger, your appetite, your cravings, the way you're feeling after meals, things like that. And it goes very deep, okay? So like the more research and stuff that I do into all these various hormones and different things going on, the more you realize how many moving parts there are. And it really makes me realize here, the more you learn, it's not just a matter of, a lot of people are like, oh, I just have no willpower, or I'm just like, I'm not good at this, or I just can't control myself, or I don't do good. There's so many reasons why you might be dealing with appetite regulation issues, whether it's you're eating too much, or you have insane cravings, or you don't have really good control of like when you're consuming food, or maybe you're under eating and feeling very full all the time. There is a very intricate system obviously going on within your human body, and there are many different things that could be impacting your appetite and your hunger and those types of things and the food choices that you're making. So it's really a lot of fun for me, and hopefully a lot of fun for you, to learn this and to implement this. And also, as you guys know, I'm the hugest believer that the more you know, the more you can set yourself up for success and fight back against certain things. And the more you can understand and learn about your body, the more you can work with it and not fight against it. And I think that's the big thing with all of these calls and all of this education that I do like to provide to you, is that's the main goal, right? It's like, nobody wants to feel like they're fighting their own body every single day. Every bit of food that you put in your mouth is making you fat, or you have no appetite control because you got no willpower, or you're lazy or whatever. And that's not the way we want to feel. And like I said, there's so many reasons and there's so many ways that we could be struggling. So the more we know, the more we can get behind the scenes and we can understand at that deeper level what might be going on. And then instead of just having a thought about, oh, I've never been able to control my appetite, we can actually come and we can take a look at what's going on in your body, and we can try to start making some adjustments based on some actual science as opposed to just what we feel or what we think. That's what we want to talk about today, right? The role of these hunger hormones and how they're going to impact your body, right? So a couple things we want to learn. Leptin and ghrelin are going to be the main ones, okay? So this is the satiety hormone and the hunger hormones, all right? So as you can see here, starting from the top, we're just going to review a few of these hormones. There's some really interesting stuff that popped up as I was doing research and stuff. So I've got a few pages here of things that I'm going to share with you guys, and hopefully you guys find it super valuable. And then obviously we've got like some action items in here in terms of like how you can eat and how you can live, right? So from like a food and a fitness and wellness standpoint, or food and lifestyle, let's just call it that, to make sure that we're supporting this system the best way we can, right? Because I think that's a big thing that gets misconstrued here, is that when people hear the word hormones, they immediately think like bad things, right? It's like, oh my God, not hormones, oh shit. Like once hormones get in the mix, now we're really in trouble. It's like hormones are always in the mix. Whether it's these hormones from a satiety standpoint, whether it's various sex hormones, male or female, there's hormones running through your body at all times in all different ways, right? It is quite literally a matter of trying to balance these things and learn to work with them again, as opposed to against them, and learning to understand, okay, what could potentially my food and my lifestyle choices be doing to these various hormones that are going to win always. Let me remind you of that. Your hormones will always win. All right. So you might think you're getting ahead of the game for a second. The hormones will always win. So we need to learn to work with them, to live with them, to support them so that they support us back in getting what we want in terms of our best body and health and energy and just looking, feeling, and functioning really well, right? That needed to get said because hormones are here. They're here to stay. So you better learn to work with them and stop fighting them. So let's start with leptin. So this one's obviously huge. The satiety hormone. So if you are feeling like maybe you could be a little bit more full, or you could have a bit better appetite management, this is the one that you're going to want to learn a lot about. And it's actually really interesting because with all these like GLP-1 medications and things like this, leptin is the thing that they're still going after, and was the initial thing that they were going after because of this, right? It's the satiety hormone. So leptin has been getting studied for a long time, and they've been trying to make drugs that impact leptin to increase your satiety, and they can't figure out how to do this in a tangible way. So then they stumbled upon these GLP-1s, and the GLP-1s are creating a result in terms of reduced appetite and stuff. So they've gone that route. But leptin is another one of these, obviously, from a hormonal standpoint, right? If they could ever figure out how to bottle this up, the result should be pretty incredible, right? Because it is related to satiety. So leptin, oddly enough, is produced by fat cells, which I always find interesting, right? Because it's like, all right, fat cells are producing your satiety hormone, right? But that's exactly what happens. The fat cells produce that leptin, that satiety hormone. And then what that does, that goes down the line, that signals to your brain that your body is good from an energy standpoint, right? So once you've been eating, obviously as we're eating a meal, right, leptin levels start to climb, start to increase until the point where we're like, okay, I'm good here, right? This is enough food. I'm happy here. Don't need any more food. So at this point, leptin levels have increased to a point that creates that satiation within the brain where you're like, yeah, okay, I'm good. Like, I don't need another bite. But obviously reduces hunger, increases energy burn, and regulates long-term energy balance. So it essentially regulates metabolism. And that's what I'm going to get into at the end here, because that's the super interesting stuff, how powerful this leptin is, and why we absolutely want to make sure we're eating in alignment with supporting our leptin sensitivity. You might also think that just more leptin is better. So if I like took my leptin dial and I cranked it up to 100, that would be amazing because I would just never be hungry. But actually what starts to happen is there's a sweet spot, right? So if we're too low on leptin, then obviously we're hungry, right? But there comes to a point, and they see this in obese people, where you become leptin resistant. So your fat cells are actually sending the leptin hormone, but your brain is no longer, sensitive to it, right? So your brain's no longer sensitive to that hormone, and it's like insulin, right? Where it's okay, at some point it just starts to build up and the brain's like, all right, whatever, it forgets about it. So people that are dealing with obesity and stuff may actually have very high, or typically do have very high levels of leptin because they are overfed and they do have plenty of energy in their body, but the brain is not actually picking up the signal, and then you continue to eat. And then this is another big part of the problem, if you will. So leptin is not so much about just how much can we have? It's very much about, are we balanced with our leptin levels, and are we sensitive to the levels of leptin that are in our body? And the sensitivity is really the main thing that is going to be the most impactful piece of satiety, okay? So just keep that in mind. So in fat loss, as you lose fat, leptin drops, okay? So as fat mass decreases, and this is part of the reason why it's hard to lose fat and keep it off, right? Because you got these hormones that are working against the process, right? So as we're losing weight, leptin is dropping. So obviously as that satiety hormone is decreasing, then we run the risk of becoming more hungry. So that makes you hungrier, and that reduces your metabolic rate to conserve energy. So that's another really interesting piece of the puzzle as well, is there's this compensatory mechanism there too, right? You see this is like the whole metabolic adaptation idea, where when you're eating a very small amount of food for a long time, your body adapts, right? Because again, you're going to be very low on leptin. Leptin's going to be signaling that you're hungry, and then your body's going to be reducing your metabolic rate in order to essentially keep itself alive. So there's this whole interesting kind of thing going on here. And then again here in obesity, chronically high leptin leads to leptin resistance. So basically the brain is not hearing the signal anymore. And then you get persistent hunger despite storing excess fat. So that's another huge piece of the puzzle here as well, is that leptin resistance is definitely a thing, but it can also be restored. So your leptin sensitivity can absolutely be restored. So how do we do that? To improve leptin sensitivity, lose fat, but gradually, right? So we don't do the extreme crash diets, because that will also crash out the leptin, and then that will feed that hunger response. So if we do this on a slow and steady and consistent and manageable way, we can slowly create that reduction in leptin, and we can slowly recreate that leptin sensitivity, which we wouldn't particularly or probably get in these extreme diets, right? So that's why everything's probably better in a little bit more like moderation and in a little bit more of a sustainable manner. Exercise, enormous for this, okay? So exercise is very well known to resensitize you to leptin, okay? So this is absolutely something that we want to make sure that we're taking care of on the daily, both resistance training and aerobic training. So your weights and your cardio, they're both going to really help with that leptin sensitivity. Sleep, believe it or not, massive impact on leptin and ghrelin, and I'm going to show you guys that in the chart at the end, the impact that a quality sleep versus a poor sleep has on your leptin levels versus your ghrelin levels and your other satiety and hunger-based hormones, okay? Eating that anti-inflammatory whole food-based diet, so reducing sugar, reducing inflammatory oils, things like that. That's more of a brain-centered thing. So the whole inflammation thing is like, all right, if we've got this high sugar, processed fats in our diet, we can potentially get a little bit of inflammation in the brain and in other places in the body too, right? But obviously that hypothalamus, right? So this is that brain center that leptin impacts. So if that gets a little bit inflamed, then obviously we could have leptin resistance. So we want to reduce any kind of inflammation that's in the brain and the body, and that's going to help us resensitize some of that leptin sensitivity. And then avoiding late night eating can also be really helpful for this as well. Really what we want to do is make sure that we're very consistent with our eating times. So then that brings us down to number 2, which is ghrelin, the hunger hormone. I always remember this one because it's like ghrelin is your stomach's growling, ghrelin, whatever. So when your stomach's growling, that's your hunger hormone. That's ghrelin kicking in. That's ghrelin growling. And that is when you know that your hunger hormones are kicking up. Okay. So this is produced in the stomach. I think it would be the opposite, right? You'd think like leptin would be getting produced in the stomach because the stomach is what's filling up with food and calories. And then you'd think that the fat tissue would be producing ghrelin because as fat tissue obviously started to get burnt off or whatever, it would tell the body it's hungry. But oddly enough, it's reversed, right? So your fat tissue tells the body that you're full and your stomach tells the body that you're hungry, which I guess if I say it that way, it makes sense both ways. In this case, when the stomach's growling, that's when the ghrelin's kicking up, right? Functions, again, it's going to signal hunger to the brain, and it is going to rise before meals and it is going to drop after you have consumed food. Okay, so that is probably the natural progression of getting hungry. Okay, I'm getting hungry, my ghrelin is going up, I eat a meal, my ghrelin is going down because I'm no longer hungry. Very plain and simple. And the big role here for ghrelin is just to stimulate appetite when the body needs food. We want to make sure that this is very well regulated. Obviously, we don't want things to be all over the place here and dysregulated because then we're getting hungry random times. We have really no understanding of hunger and satiety cues and that type of thing. We want to make sure that ghrelin and leptin are very well regulated, right? So that we can be on a very regular schedule. We can be very predictable with our hunger and our appetite. And then that's going to be very helpful from a consistency and a fat loss standpoint. So when it's related to fat loss, ghrelin increases during a calorie restriction, obviously, and any kind of fasting. So I think that the fasting part is really interesting to consider. All right, because fasting has become a very popular thing to do. A lot of people are doing it. Admittedly, I do a lot of fasting myself. Honestly, not because I think it's good. I just got in the habit of doing it before I was like educated enough. And now I'm just in the routine. Fasting for me is mostly routine based. It has nothing to do with any kind of a benefit that I think that I'm getting from it. But the thing that's interesting about this is that, okay, so fasting, basically what it's going to create is it's going to create this exponential increase in ghrelin. And we may be able to fight that for half the day or whatever. But what happens when ghrelin's cranked up to 10, right? Leptin is down, right? Because you're hungry. And then we get a chance to eat. That could potentially send us into a bit of an overconsumption. I'm not going to say binge eating, but after a fast, you may like really crush a ton of food. You may feel like you're really hungry the rest of the day or whatever. So that's definitely something if you're one of these people who you're like, yeah, if I do fasting, I feel like I can't control my eating later in the day. Once I start eating, then it's like the floodgates open. You're getting that super rise in ghrelin. You're getting a big reduction in leptin. And then once you get that opportunity to eat, the floodgates open, right? So be very mindful of that if you are someone who's fasting, but not doing it super successfully in terms of it doesn't really help you with calorie management, because that's essentially all fasting is going to really do for you. There's no magic there. It's really just a good calorie management tool. If you're getting some kind of a response from your ghrelin and your leptin signals, and it's leading you to overconsume, then you're really not getting, obviously, the calorie management benefit of fasting, and you're probably just digestive upset and stuff because you're over consuming food in a very short window of time. You'd probably be better just to space it out and manage these hormones a lot better and manage digestion and energy levels and everything else much better as well. So this can make staying in that deficit a little bit harder if it's unmanaged, obviously. So that's the thing. If we are going to eat at a calorie deficit, there's definitely some ways we can make sure that we're eating those higher volume foods but keeping calories low so that we can manage the leptin, we can manage the ghrelin, we can manage that hunger response while still staying in that caloric deficit, right? So chronically elevated ghrelin obviously is going to equal persistent hunger and cravings, right? So that's another big piece of the puzzle here, is that if we do have this hunger hormone obviously running wild throughout the body, that is going to lead to a lot more of this persistent hunger and cravings. And this could be that feeling of, oh, I've got no willpower, when really it's you've got a hormone driving the bus here, right? So we want to make sure we get that kind of back on track and we figure this stuff out from like more of an underlying physiology problem, as opposed to you thinking you just have a willpower problem, which typically that's not what it's about. It's a lot more of you have a problem regulating your appetite, which is where all of this stuff comes into play. All right, so to manage ghrelin, what we can do here is we can eat enough protein and fiber. All right, so protein and fiber suppress ghrelin for a longer period of time. They slow down basically the digestive process. They're a lot more satiety inducing. Okay, so that's the thing, right? Is we want to eat these high satiety inducing foods. We don't want to be eating just like low quality, quick digesting foods that have no nutrients, no fiber, no water, no protein, any of that stuff, because again, that's not the thing that's going to help regulate these hormones, right? So we want to avoid skipping meals, especially if it leads to uncontrolled hunger later at night, which we just spoke about. Structured meals, all right? So that's going to basically just help manage things, right? The longer we go without eating, obviously the more this ghrelin's building, the more leptin is dropping, and then the more of this discrepancy we have here, the more likely we are to fall off the wagon, overconsume, or give in to some crazy cravings. That's so common for everybody, right? So, oh, I didn't eat for 8 hours and then I just ate anything I could find, like whatever was in sight, and like I just had pizza or I just had fast food or whatever because I just needed something, right? That's ghrelin going this way, leptin going this way, and us needing to find some kind of a way to manage that, right? So we got to be very careful here, and we just be more strategic. That's all it is. It's all strategy, right? This is all strategy. This is all structure, in my opinion. And that's why I find it so interesting. So structured meals, regular timings, going to be huge. All right. High quality sleep. This is what I want to show you guys, right? Poor sleep is going to equal an increase in ghrelin, which is not what we want, and a decrease in leptin, which is exactly the opposite of what we want. So the poor sleep, or sacrificing hours of sleep for scrolling your cell phone or going on Netflix at night or whatever, that's what this causes. And then you wake up the next day and you're like, oh, I don't understand why I'm so hungry all the time. I'm low energy. I'm like all over the map. This is what you're promoting, right? You're promoting a hormonal imbalance, right? And these hormones that maybe don't get talked about as much as some of your other ones, like your thyroid hormone, testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone. But man, they got a massive impact on your body, right? And then also too, like when these things are dysregulated and we're over consuming food and potentially giving into a lot of hunger and cravings and these types of things, then that's also throwing off those other hormones, right? So you can see how this thing kind of cascade effects, right? And these are things that we don't want to be messing with very frequently. We want to make sure we're getting high quality sleep and avoiding high sugar, low volume foods, right? So again, they're not going to blunt the ghrelin response effectively because they're low weight, they're low protein, they're low fiber, they're low nutrient density, there's no water, there's nothing in these things that can really promote satiety. And that's the huge issue, is that it does not contribute to decreasing our ghrelin levels and increasing our leptin levels. And that's why we eat, and they're also super calorie dense. So it's like we eat this like small bit of food, but it's quite calorie dense. We get a little bit of a response, right? But then 30, 45 minutes, an hour later, you're hungry again, right? So we get no regulation. And that's the huge problem with that standard American diet and these low nutrient density, low volume foods, high sugar, low weight. The main issue with them is they're just not helpful from a satiety standpoint in any kind of a way. And they just jam you full of calories all day long, and none of them are quality. So there's a few other key appetite regulating hormones here that we want to cover. One will be very famous and familiar to you. The other you will probably not have heard of. So we've got our peptide YY or PYY, right? It's actually interesting because GLP-1 isn't as, I guess, like influential or as important as your leptin and your ghrelin. They found out a way to obviously medically induce a response from the GLP-1. It gets a lot of play and it gets a lot of attention, but there's other things going on here, right? So this peptide YY or PYY, this gets secreted in the gut post-meal and promotes satiety. So this comes right along with your leptin, right? So as that leptin's going up, so should that PYY hormone be going up as well as we're eating meals, or as we have this food sitting in our gut. So when we're having the high protein, high fiber, high volume meals, there's more food that stays in our gut for a longer period of time, and it can help to secrete this PYY for a longer period of time, which has us feeling satiated and feeling fed for a longer period of time. And again, this is boosted by protein, fiber, and volume-based foods. And then we've got our world famous GLP-1. All right, so this is another hunger related hormone, and that is going to slow gastric emptying, and it is going to enhance your fullness, right? So again, boosted by protein, fiber, resistant starches from a food-based standpoint. And then obviously we see here GLP-1 agonists like Mounjaro and Ozempic. So if you're on one of those GLP-1 agonists, then you're getting this exogenously, you're getting this cranked up to 100 literally. You are getting that slowed gastric emptying, very enhanced feeling of fullness, a lot less cravings and hunger and things like that. If you are not taking one of those, then we can rely on the natural way, the good old-fashioned way, and that's going to be food quality, right? So protein being a huge piece of the puzzle, fiber being a huge piece of the puzzle, any kind of resistant starches, which is literally just potato or rice or anything like that, cooked and cooled. So you cook it, and the starches become very edible, right? And then when you cool it, those starches create what's called a resistant starch. That acts as more of a probiotic or like a fiber basically. And then you can even reheat that food and it's still got the resistant starch. So that's a great piece of the puzzle. We can drink water. Exercise is actually a great way to manage your GLP-1 and make you more sensitive to GLP-1 as well. So literally it's all the basic food and lifestyle stuff that we've always done, we've always known. And it's always done this, right? It's always impacted GLP-1 in a positive way, but no one really ever knew about GLP-1 until your Mounjaro, your Ozempic came about. And then all of a sudden it became this hot topic. But this is a satiety hormone that's been a part of your body forever. And again, it's just like we found a way to manipulate it to get some benefit from a weight loss standpoint. But that doesn't mean that we can't do this naturally as well, right? So again, that's just going to come from quality food and quality lifestyle choices, all right? And then we've got our insulin, right? So insulin is going to be related to blood sugar, right? But not only blood sugar control. Insulin, believe it or not, is going to interact with your leptin and your ghrelin signals as well, which is obviously a huge piece of the puzzle here. If we can stabilize our insulin levels, we have better appetite control. So basically what that means is if we can stay very insulin sensitive, we can also stay very leptin and ghrelin sensitive. And that's exactly what we want. We want to be more probably sensitive to leptin than we do to ghrelin, but this is how insulin can help this situation here, right? So if we have a lot of spikes and crashes, then we end up with more hunger and more cravings. So that's basically if we're like on a high sugar diet or a high carb diet or something that's spiking our blood sugar consistently, or we're like on that low fiber, low protein diet, whatever, then we have more opportunity for energy highs and lows or blood sugar highs and lows. And then obviously we get this instability from an insulin sensitivity or from an insulin standpoint, and then that's going to have an impact on our appetite regulation, right? So if we have issues with like blood sugar or whatever, then obviously we're going to have these satiety hormones that are kicking in and stealing the show here just to make sure that everything stays even keel. So we want to make sure that obviously we're eating just again, you guys get it at this point, it's a whole food based diet and that's nutrition for you, right? So we've got food and lifestyle strategies to master your appetite hormones. All right, so let's just go through this quick, just a quick little chart here, right? So the strategy here, just to make sure that we are mastering those appetite hormones. So again, we're promoting great leptin control, great leptin sensitivity, and great ghrelin management, right? So we want to make sure that we're managing ghrelin, we're keeping it very regulated, and then we want to make sure that our leptin is very well sensitized and very well regulated as well. Super easy here, right? Strategy, high protein, 30 to 40 grams per meal. If you want to know why it works like that, suppresses ghrelin, increases PYY and GLP-1, two great hunger hormones for you, and preserves your muscle mass, all right? Fiber-rich meals, delays gastric emptying and increases satiety hormones, right? So if we get delayed gastric emptying from the fiber-rich meals, we're going to have an increase in this PYY, we're going to have an increase in GLP-1, and we're going to keep ghrelin from kicking up, right? Because ghrelin's produced in the stomach just like PYY, just like GLP-1. So if we can have these fiber-dense foods in here and they're sitting in there and they're signaling to the body that, okay, I'm fed, I've got energy in here, then obviously we get more balance from our hunger and our satiety hormones. Volume-based eating. Again, the more food we can jam in, the more it stays in there, the more we can feel fed, even if there's not a lot of calories in there, right? So high water, low calorie foods will stretch the stomach and decrease the ghrelin response, right? So I think that's huge. And this is why we eat a ton of vegetables. This is why we eat fruits. I think lean proteins are very low in calories considering their weight and their volume and everything. And same with quality carbohydrate, like a fiber dense carbohydrate, right? So anything that's going to be high volume, a high weight, right? That's the kind of stuff we want to be putting in the gut most often because it's going to help to tamp down this ghrelin response. It's also going to help to kick up this response from PYY and GLP-1, and then leptin will stay regulated essentially, right? We've got our whole foods over processed foods. Again, processed foods lead to faster digestion, which will then increase ghrelin and decrease the PYY and the GLP-1, which is not what we want. And then that leads to less satiety and then stabilized blood sugar, right? So we want to make sure that we stabilize our blood sugar during and after meals, before, during, and after, right? So if we just have protein, fiber, fat-focused meals, then obviously we support our blood glucose regulation a lot better. That makes sure our insulin levels stay a little bit better, more regulated, and then everything works out in our favor, right? Protein, fiber, fat, blunts insulin spikes and crashes, all right? And then we've got the lifestyle habits that improve appetite control. So again, it's all the same stuff, right? Again, we want to go from a habit-based standpoint, 7 to 9 hours of sleep. This is the cool one, right? So it's like it decreases ghrelin, so it decreases hunger hormone, it increases leptin, which is your satiety hormone, and then you have better GLP-1 sensitivity with a better sleep. So this is a huge piece of the puzzle why everybody's always harping on sleep nowadays. Leptin also regulates your metabolism. All right, so that's another piece of this puzzle we don't want to forget. It's not only regulating appetite suppression, it is regulating metabolism and how many calories you're burning and how you're burning fat or utilizing fat for fuel throughout the day. So this is massive, all right? So get your sleep. Strength training, again, same thing, enhances leptin and insulin sensitivity and decreases inflammation. All the things we want, right? We want better leptin sensitivity. We definitely want better insulin sensitivity. And nobody wants an abundance of inflammation, obviously, right? Walking, stress management, consistent meal timing, all of these things are just going to help from a hormone standpoint as well, right? So these are all these basic habits that everybody thinks, oh yeah, I've heard this 1,000,000 times. But again, this is more of the, but why? But why is this important? Okay, cool, take a walk, but why? Because it's going to regulate your blood sugar and it's going to improve your appetite regulation, right? It's going to help reduce your stress, or it's going to improve stress management. It's going to reduce cortisol, right? And then again, like all of these things, these are the underlying whys that nobody really probably even knows. Most people don't go that far. They don't get any deeper than, yeah, take a walk, go to sleep. It's okay, great. Like we get it, but why? This is one of the many reasons why. All right. And then I do think it's fun to go into insulin a little bit more here because, I don't know, I find insulin interesting. Obviously, it's a hot topic nowadays. Everybody's throwing around, oh, I'm insulin resistant, and the only reason why I'm overweight is because of insulin and whatever. It's probably not the case, if we're being honest. Would it be putting you at a disadvantage? Yes. Can you work yourself out of that insulin resistance very simply? Yes. How would you do that? Let's start here and here too, okay? Look at that. You got 10 things and you'll absolutely control this, which is everybody's reason for being overweight. Everybody talks about insulin and inflammation. If those two things didn't exist, I don't know what anybody's excuse would be for struggling with weight. But so when insulin is well regulated, ghrelin drops appropriately after meals, right? So we get that reduced appetite after meals. Leptin signals are more accurate, right? So we are more sensitive to leptin, which means we have much better appetite regulation. And then GLP-1 and PYY are optimized, which makes you feel full and satiated on less food, which would be nice, right? For a lot of us. And then obviously appetite becomes self-regulating and cravings decrease when all this stuff is all in alignment. And that's ideally what we're going for, right? We want to feel like the body is working with us, not against us. The body absolutely will work with you, but not if you treat it like shit and not if you're putting all the wrong stuff into it and if you're not doing the things that don't support it, right? So when insulin is dysregulated, right? So when we become insulin resistant or we have elevated insulin levels or things like that, spikes, crashes, whatever it might be, now we get that ghrelin rebound, right? And that leads to hunger soon after eating. So that's typically going to be related to some kind of a blood sugar issue. Leptin will become less effective. The GLP-1s and the PYY obviously are not being released to the same extent. And then this is where we get this increase of cravings. And then fat loss becomes harder because then we're over consuming. And when we're over consuming, we're typically going to be creating more insulin and then we get more storage from a fat standpoint. So again, appetite regulation, controlling your diet is really the show here. And then we've just got a couple more things I wanted to run through. So leptin doesn't just reduce appetite. It also stimulates fat burning through the central and peripheral mechanisms, which basically means like direct and indirect ways. So leptin is a fat burning, from a fat burning standpoint, right? And don't worry about the mechanisms. This is all the fun stuff that I have to look at. So we just want to look at the function and the effect. All right, so leptin function. So leptin will suppress the appetite, right? It helps us manage our appetite, which decreases our food intake. Increases fat breakdown. That increases fat lipolysis. So that's exactly, lipolysis is fat breakdown. It increases fatty acid release. So again, it's allowing your body to release fat stored fat from energy. So you're releasing fat from your fat tissue and you're burning it as energy. All right. That's exactly what we're all trying to do, right? Even me, I'm pretty lean. I still would love if I had better fat burning and fatty acid release from my tissues, right? Like we'd all love to be a little bit leaner. And then again, leptin is promoting fat oxidation in muscle as well, which increases fat burning, right? Basically what leptin does is it allows your muscle to burn more fat for fuel, which is exactly how we can lose some body fat, right? Reduces liver fat and production, which is huge, right? So this is basically just a huge health thing, right? Nobody wants a fatty liver. This is again another, call it like epidemic of things that have become very common with this standard American diet over the last 50 years. Like the fatty liver seems to be like something that didn't exist as much a long time ago. It was always due to alcohol related issues. All right. So people that were alcoholics and stuff would get a fatty liver because their liver's damaged. It can't metabolize fats in the same way, right? If it's damaged. But now we're getting this non-alcoholic fatty liver. This is another big piece of this whole leptin function, right? So if it reduces the liver fat production, then that's decreasing lipo, which genesis is. So lipo is fat, genesis is production, right? So it's decreasing fat production, enhancing thyroid hormone output, which is excellent. Then we're getting an increase in our basal metabolic rate. We're getting an increase in mitochondrial activity. That's incredible. So leptin's actually got the ability to increase our metabolism, all right, by its impact and its influence on the thyroid, which is super cool. And then it's going to help to regulate insulin. And then when insulin is better regulated, it's preventing fat storage overload. Okay. So if we have regulated insulin sensitivity, we are not pulling a bunch of sugar from the blood or whatever and storing it in fat tissue. We're able to burn it like we're supposed to be burning it. And then the last thing here is how to get leptin to work for you again. So if you feel like you're listening to this and you're like, shit, that sounds a lot like me, I'm dealing with a lot of these problems, then again, we've already been here, but the strategy to get it working for you again, eat a lot more protein and a lot more fiber. It's going to help keep you full. It's going to support fat burning and hormones. Avoid the obvious, right? Avoiding added sugars and avoid snacking all day long. So get super consistent. That's the thing, is you want to get very consistent with your meals. I can promise you, if you ate lunch at noon today and you feel hungry for a snack at 1:30, you're not going to die if you wait until 3 or 4 o'clock. You will make it through. I promise you. No one ever ate a meal at noon and died by 2 p.m. All right. You got a lot of stored energy sitting in here that you can utilize. So if you got to get a little bit uncomfortable and you're like, yeah, I'm feeling hungry, I eat at 8, noon, 4, and 7. All right. And that's when I eat. And if you can do that, you're going to really help to regulate these satiety hormones, because they can, like I said, the more predictable you can become, the more they can predict and the more they will self-regulate. The body is an incredibly adaptable organism, which is really interesting when you play around with it. Make sure we're lifting weights and walking daily, 7 to 9 hours of sleep, sticking to whole foods, right? This is the strategy. There's no secret. There's nothing crazy. There's no secret thing. Take this secret supplement. When it comes to leptin, when it comes to ghrelin, when it comes to managing these appetite regulating hormones, we just got to go back to the fundamentals, all right? And if we can do that, we're going to get a really nice response. If there are questions, always, please reach out, please ask, let me know. Just make a comment below wherever this is posted. Fire away with your questions. And then, yeah, hey, let's start putting it to you. This isn't rocket science here, but easier said than done in some cases. And if you are feeling like you're struggling with a lot of appetite regulation, these are the places to get started, okay? Thanks for being on. Thanks for being with me, and we'll catch you on the next one.